I just heard a couple of people who are new to my acquaintance. I enjoyed listening to broadcast worlds discussing various ideas that pertain to politics and religion. And somebody in the chat who seemed to be more welcome than me blamed abortion on the Jews. Abortion doesn't seem to be very well understood. In the script, Texas school book script, Gail Burson presents it as satanic rituals, and that's more or less where these broadcasters were coming from. So they're intentionally or unintentionally in line with the Texas school book. In other words, the people who killed Kennedy were saving the unborn child. Whether they know that that's what they're saying or not, whether that's what they mean to be saying or not, is a totally other question. So let's look at the devious semiotic structure that we also find in the banking system here in Tacoma. They positioned me after scoring abortions on me through attack prostitutions. And one of these people who was very benevolent contributed to my understanding the legal foundation for involuntary alcoholic beverage intoxication when a battered 11-year-old was nearly killed with over-ingestion of Mogan David wine. And it certainly was involuntary. Of course, they probably meant it to be shrewd, but there's no telling. I mean, none of these people have identified their claim with respect to the Texas school book. But Clem Baker owned Clem's shack, the coffin I was hammered into with Dee Dee. And Alan Berkowitz said a baker's dozen straight from the oven, 12 and 13. With the age brackets, Dee Dee was clearly criminally intentioned. She was in on the genocide plan and symbolized Nazi Germany. But she was the girl, so the boy who was entrapped in this Venus flytrap designed by Attica State Prison psychiatrist, who was a Russian Jew, had the Trump, if that's what you want to call it, the ability to destroy the world. His name was Wattenmaker, which is chosen in the Elizabethan Theater Index for like Rotten Maker. And there's a film called The Art of the Holocaust, film in the Holocaust that has a peephole, which is how Woody Allen pronounced people in his autobiographical peephole. And there was a peephole in the door of this coffin, and a vulturous eye came to the peephole. So this was a semiotic war system justifying AIDS as a holy war. We know Greg Carl wrote the persona is subjected to successive degradations of the X motive. The women who were involved in cheering all of this have never been able to admit that that's what he said. They've never been able to admit that I was deaf, that they were indoctrinating me with sexual libertinage. I'm not trying to point the finger at anybody, but it wasn't exclusively the Jews. I'll give you an example of how I know that this is more widespread of a macabre. Martin Luther King Boulevard is up here at Stop Martin at Planned Parenthood. They have ramshackle houses numerically coded for yesterday and today style serial abortions, birth control in the era of commercial sexual psychology. Well, Martin Luther King was sort of arm twisted into running a presidential campaign with Benjamin Spock. So if you lift the mask of diabolicism and Christendom off of these New Age cluckers, Ku Klux Klan has just morphed. You end up with, religious bigotry in a hood committing terror. Underwrites many of the U.S. military's ventures in terrorism. And the presidential campaign that King was arm twisted into was with Dr. Benjamin Spock, who looked after children. But of course, Spock is known in another glitch of the nomenclature for having said that is highly illogical. Nonviolence and sleeping around resulting in birth control is highly illogical thing to call conscientious objection. So they arm twist them into this mechanism of imperial ideology. And we're told that this was just the inevitable outcome of the age of folly. But what's missing is serious efforts to make clear that that's what was in store, that was in the offing, that's what kind of counter-revolution was coming, and to score the particulars in our academic history so that they can be discussed. More meaningful ways of addressing these problems can be evaluated. And of course, they say that the scripture is a promise of God. And so God didn't have the right to change his mind if you believe those things. You should, if you, Christian ethics makes some sense. So if you believe in Christian ethics, my pastor has said we have the responsibility to fend off such a gruesome exigency. And you might say we engage in supplication that God would change his or her mind about the matter. And so, and they act as though God isn't entitled to. Now, there are people who come right down and say this is just cock and bull. Whatever you believe about Jesus' benevolence and his influence on teachers like Martin Luther King, great teachers. The zany Nazi Hollywood shenanigan has to go. We mustn't forget that there are people who rationally think that way, who have the right to think that way. So when they kill Martin Luther King and JFK and say it was to protect the unborn, while they're writing about subjecting the persona to the successive degradations of the X motive, and really rigorously obsessing with somebody who they think is an ego tripper was actually someone who they've earmarked for their production line. They know that a fairly wide range of people can be very scared by Christian firebombing tactics. And I was certainly one of those people, especially when I was a child. And even if I'm not anymore, which is debatable, they have this resort, which is just to make my life so miserable that people point at me and say, I don't want to be like that. I don't, that may be all very noble and everything. But, and they sell it as Bushnell stuff and Sean Strub stuff and Michael Foucault stuff. I mean, they find an icon who self destructs and say that was salvation. To sell burning children in tents. I mean, a lot of the stuff in the Quran is very wise and true. But the way it's being used is as a script for will nurture people through the genocide as part of the sale of genocide futures. So, I mean, being preached to about abortion by the Nazi Germans who created the Xylon B gas chambers is not something that gives me any edification. And they scripted these things in child bondage situations. I mean, that's one of the things that's really frightening about these bio warriors is they were actually using children in bondage situations, bondage school situations, so that they could carry on this duplicity of moralizing while they committed atrocity. And it's strange to see people who I enjoy hearing from mingling with that sort of social disturbance. Yes, and that's the outcome of Holy McCartney's refusal to intervene rationally in the affair of Gail Burstyn. Instead, he's just cooking up. Carmen Colucci used to say his mother's cooking up a storm. This is what we stood by and allowed to happen. Certainly don't expect me, whose father drove a school bus in retirement, was chased out of Pittsburgh by people who drove recklessly at an elementary school, to support and substantiate the absurd theater that is at work. I'm not going to ask for clarification because I know none would be forthcoming. That's not the sort of media gang the sandbaggers are. I mean, if you want to try to connect the dots yourself, you have George Galloway and somebody named Simon who was from Weaponized News, where Sam and Daniel were. And Simon is suggested of Simon Sharma because the citizens are all going to pronounce a verdict about a library clerk, the clerk, who thought he was the Lord, and all of this stuff that child pornographers come up with in the name of the church. Whether these people are knowingly casting their fortunes with the people like Gail Burstyn or not is difficult to ascertain. I strongly doubt that any of them are going to be helpful in the matter because there's too much Hollywood land staking at work in the tragedy that was visited on me by these poachers of dialectical.